Welcome to the Michaela Peterson podcast, episode 9. The past year was the worst year of my life. Both of my parents almost died repeatedly. First my mom, then my dad. You can't make this up. It's been insane. I'm writing about it in more detail. It'll be in my book. So Andre, my husband, and I have spent every day for the last 6 months trying to find my dad help, looking everywhere, traveling around the world. If it hadn't been for Andre, we wouldn't have made it through this year. So this is a brief podcast with my dad about what happened to him and my family in the last year. This was a very difficult interview. It flattened both of us the evening we recorded it. Dad's been in the public eye for years now, and his sudden disappearance was definitely noticed. He disappeared due to a benzodiazepine dependency. We both thought explaining what's gone on in the last year could help other people avoid the same hell that we're just, hopefully, barely getting out of. Explaining these personal struggles is really stressful, so this wasn't an easy conversation, and going through these experiences and then feeling like you owe an explanation to the world is tough. I assume there will be plenty of questions after this video, and we'll get to those in time. Please check out the links in the description and in the show notes to learn more about the topics we're about to cover. Hi, Dad.
Hi, kiddo.
It's really nice to be doing a family update with you rather than about you.
Yeah. Well, it feels like a good thing from this end of the universe as well.
Good. When was the last time you used a mic to record anything for YouTube?
It would have been last fall, likely early fall, maybe September.
It was a
August,
while ago.
maybe even.
Yeah, almost a year.
Yeah, a long time.
So,
Felt like a long time too.
it felt like a very, very, very long time.
Very long time. Yes.
Well, in the most Canadian fashion I can muster, what the hell happened, eh?
Right. That's what people were asking online. Eh? Right. What happened? Well, an accident is when 3 or 4 or 5 unlikely things happen at the same time. And I would say that's what happened. I mean, first of all, I spent last January with you in Zurich at a hospital. I wasn't in the hospital, but I was there most of the time.
You were in the hospital a lot.
I was in the hospital a lot, yeah. Well, I had to feed you, or make food for you.
Yeah, he
so
brought
I was
me
there
steak.
Through all of January, and you were getting some pretty invasive surgery done on your foot. And then your mom and I, Tammy and I, went to Australia and New Zealand for most of February, and that was actually not too bad a trip.
Mm-hmm.
I felt all right, and she was feeling all right too, but we knew her surgery for what was hypothetically a relatively treatable cancer was coming up in March, so that was hanging over our heads, although we weren't overwhelmingly worried about it. And then she went and had her surgery, and then we were informed 6 weeks after that, after she had recovered but was still suffering some pain, that the easily treatable and non-dangerous, slow-growing malignancy that we were told she had was, in fact, something fast-growing with something near 100% fatality rate within a year, regardless of treatment.
Mm-hmm. Like brain cancer.
So that was
deadly.
We were told that in about 10 minutes. And so when we were just expecting if not a clean bill of health, at least a representation of what we'd already been told. And then she went in to have more invasive surgery, and hypothetically that worked, but it created terrible side effects.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the start of a whole other 6 months long nightmare of trying to deal with surgical complications, which we did eventually resolve, but not until the middle of August. In fact, literally not until the day of our 30th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
So that was all hair-raising and stressful, to say the least. I mean, you and I have talked about that, but we seemed to have a life-threatening emergency on Tammy's part for about every 3 days for about 6 months. And then I had my own problems start to develop really with any degree of severity in about April, May, something like that. I had been taking benzodiazepines since 2016.
So why, before we get into that, why did you start taking benzodiazepines?
Well, in over the Christmas vacation in 2016, you and I and Julian and my son and Tammy went out to Vancouver Island to visit her parents and siblings. And when we were there, you and I and Andre, your husband, ate something that didn't agree with any of us and had a very severe reaction to that.
I'm still on board. It was sodium
that seems to be the most logical conclusion, but I was, the same. We had the same symptoms. I don't know if I was any more seriously affected than you or not, but I was freezing cold for about a month. I couldn't get warm no matter how much I wore. I couldn't stand up without fainting. I couldn't sleep. I don't think I slept at all for something on the order of 3 weeks.
Yeah, people like you went on Joe Rogan and talked about a sulfite reaction you had and how you didn't sleep, and people commented that, oh, it's not possible to stay awake for that long. But if you actually look into sodium metabisulfite allergies, the symptoms that we experienced aren't unheard of. There are papers.
Well, it's also impossible to stay awake voluntarily that long. That's not the same as not being able to sleep. Those are very, very different things. Whatever. It's possible that when I was laying there thinking I wasn't sleeping, that now and then I drifted off and would wake up and not notice. I mean, I can't eliminate that as a possibility, but I can certainly tell you that I slept little enough so that it was exceedingly unpleasant. It's a very long time to stay awake. And when we went back to Toronto, our family physician prescribed benzodiazepines, which are often used as a sleeping aid and an anti-anxiety medication, and something called Zopiclone, Imovane. And I hardly took the Imovane at all, maybe 4 or 5 times. But I took the benzodiazepine the way that it was prescribed, twice a day, 0.25 milligrams. And that seemed to bring the symptoms to a pretty rapid halt, which is also part of the reason I didn't need the Imovane. And then there were so many other things going on around me at that time that I never really thought about it again. You know, I thought that it was a relatively harmless drug, and I was taking it in a prescribed fashion at not too high a dose. And I developed symptoms that I now recognized were associated with its use. Weakness on my left side, and like a feeling of detachment from people around me, people I loved, some decrease in the ability to experience joy. But it wasn't until much later that I actually associated with the benzodiazepine use.
Yeah.
When your mom got so sick, my anxiety levels had been climbing up again.
Well, yeah, that was unbearable. I mean, the response I had, if you're told your parent or your wife of almost 30 years has no chance and is going to be dead in the next 10 months. That's what we were told. That surgery doesn't help and that chemo doesn't help and that this is a fast-growing cancer and you're screwed no matter what. Right. That's what we heard in one day. So yeah, anxiety.
Well, and then we went all over North America, to New York and to Houston and to LA, looking for different opinions before we decided to settle on surgery.
And everyone gave us the same opinion.
Yes, which was that nothing is going to help, but surgery was probably the best low probability bet.
Yeah. So
I asked my doctor to increase the benzodiazepine dose, but what seemed to happen as a consequence of that was that I just got more anxious. So again, in retrospect, it seems like I had a rather uncommon but not unheard of reaction to benzodiazepines, where increased dose makes anxiety worse instead of better. So then at one point when things weren't getting better and Tammy was still in the hospital, I was trying to take care of her. We had lots of help. I stopped taking them entirely and tried ketamine, which is a treatment for depression. Well, neither of those were a very good idea as it turned out. So I had to stop taking benzodiazepines entirely to take the ketamine.
Oh, yeah.
Then I stayed off them for something approximating a week.
It was a week.
Knowing that was a very bad idea. And I often think I should have known these things because I did a lot of scientific research when I was a graduate student on alcoholism. And I knew that alcohol and benzodiazepines and barbiturates were all the same chemical class, at least in terms of their effect on neurological effects. But what I knew about benzodiazepines was that they were comparatively safe compared to barbiturates, which they basically replaced. But that's much less true than everybody who's taking them hopes. And they're very widely prescribed. And I don't remember what the probability of developing a dependency on them is if you take them for more than 2 weeks. It's 50%, I believe.
It's something like 50%.
Yeah, if you take them for 2 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and over 4 weeks, it's much, much higher.
Right.
And most people prescribe them, stay on them for life. And that could have something to do with the fact that they're very difficult to get off of.
Yeah, well, it was unbelievably unpleasant. I mean, it was unbearably unpleasant. And so I started tapering off when Tammy was in the hospital, but I couldn't push that too fast because it wasn't bearable.
And what do you mean it wasn't
bearable? My anxiety levels went higher than anything I'd ever experienced. And I also developed this condition called akathisia. And the best way I can describe that is that it was like being jabbed with something, with a prod, like a cattle prod, something electric or something sharp, nonstop for hours, for all the hours I was awake. It was absolutely, I couldn't sit or lay down or stop moving. And even if I did get up and move, it wasn't like that made it better. I just couldn't stop doing it. It was horrible. Akathisia is horrible. It's like being whipped. That's another way of thinking about it. Although I really think I would have, sounds melodramatic, but I think if I had to pick whipping or akathisia, I suppose it would depend on how big a whip. But
maybe not one of those.
It wouldn't be an obvious choice.
Those 5-pronged whips.
Yes, yeah. Cat of nine tails, that might be worse. But it was plenty bad.
Yeah.
And things just fell apart more and more. Tammy recovered rather miraculously in the middle of August, but I continued my sort of downhill spiral and ended up in a clinic on the Eastern Seaboard that claimed they could do a rapid benzodiazepine detox, which was a complete bloody lie.
Yeah, well, what we figured was we didn't realize that there was this physical dependency until you stopped to try and do the ketamine. And then we tried tapering and you couldn't stand it because of the akathisia. And so we thought, well, let's go get some professional help.
Right. And I went to the clinic on the understanding that they could do a multi-day detoxification and treatment for withdrawal. And when I got there, what they told me instead was that they'd substitute one benzodiazepine for another, which wasn't the least bit helpful because clonazepam was already a long-acting benzodiazepine, and they're easier to wean off than the shorter-acting benzodiazepines. And they had nothing to offer, essentially. I came out of that clinic worse than when I went in. So,
like significantly worse.
Yes.
On 2 more sedative-like drugs in order to dampen down the akathisic symptoms.
Right, which wasn't helping much.
Given the fact that the benzodiazepines were causing the akathisia.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then I went back to Toronto.
That's November.
And things maintained their downhill trajectory, apart from the fact that Tammy was recovering quite nicely, which of course was great. But then I ended up in the hospital in Toronto, and the hospital I ended up in was also worse than useless.
Yes.
So, and I don't remember this part of it from December 15th onward. You and Andre, your husband, took me out of that hospital, and we went to Russia, of all places, near Moscow, to try a treatment offered by a clinic there that used...
They used propofol and Dextor.
Right. Propofol as a heavy sedating agent, which basically made me unconscious for 9 days.
Yeah, so you were completely out for 9 days.
Well, I also had pneumonia, which I developed apparently in the hospital in Toronto. Well, yeah, it was quite entertaining, the whole string of events.
We got questions about, why on earth would you go to Russia when you could get, world-class care in North America? And the reason for that was because we had tried the Ashton protocol. Switching over to Valium, we tried the Ashton protocol, and lots of people have success with that, although it sounds horrible.
And lots of people don't have success with it.
Yeah, I put out the first family update we did was when you went to the first rehab center in the States. And after I put that out and said, this is what's going on, I had hundreds, if not thousands of people respond, telling me how horrible benzodiazepine withdrawal could be, how they couldn't work, how they were pacing around their backyards for a year. And they basically said, just keep him alive. Make sure he stays alive.
The psychiatrists that I spoke with said, when I asked them how long the akathisia was likely to last, they said, well, it could be 2 years. And I thought, no one could live like this for 2 years. It's like, you can't live for 2 years if you're being constantly prodded with something excruciatingly painful on a moment-to-moment basis. It's just not, and there's no escape. There's no relief. That's just not possible. It wasn't possible. The reason I did survive certainly wasn't because I was enjoying my life. The reason is that I had family that I was very attached to and friends who went above and beyond the call of duty, helping to care for me. But the experience was intolerably dreadful. And it's so strange because we're now in Serbia, weirdly enough, in Belgrade of all bloody places. And we've been here about 2 weeks and went to yet another specialty clinic run by an anesthesiologist. And they modified the medication that I was taking in Florida, which is where we were last. And I don't know, I can't understand it, but virtually all my symptoms have disappeared. I'm still weak if I get up and walk around. I don't have my stamina, but I can think clearly. I feel I'm back to my regular self, such as that is.
Yeah.
During the mornings and during the days, I can work. It's very surprising to me that this happened so rapidly, but it has, and that's why we're doing this podcast or this video. But and hopefully it'll last. And Tammy is coming. I haven't been with her for more than a few days since middle of December. And that was partly because I was in bad shape and she wasn't in good enough shape to be patient with me. I mean, Jesus, she'd had a terrible time.
She almost died like every day for 6 months, like you said. And you were suffering so much that anyone around you suffered.
Yes.
Because of how horrible it was to watch. It was horrible. So just to back up a bit, you went to a hospital in Toronto and they were going to make things worse rapidly. They weren't willing, because of your akathisia, which was making you crazy, they weren't willing to slow taper you down. They just wanted to stabilize you by keeping the benzodiazepines there. So Andre and I found a clinic in Russia that would actually put you to sleep using propofol so you wouldn't have to suffer while they took the benzodiazepines out, and doing a detox.
Or suffer as much.
Oh, at least you'd be unconscious for that period of time. And doing a detox on benzodiazepines isn't recommended. You're supposed to do a slow taper, but your akathisia was so bad that even staying at the same dose was dangerous.
Right.
So we needed to get rid of that. So we spent time in Russia, managed to get it out, and it was horrible.
Well, you guys took a big risk taking me out of the hospital in Toronto, which nobody recommended. The psychiatrists certainly weren't in favor of it. And taking me somewhere as foreign as Moscow, and then attempting this, generally unadvised treatment, was all surreal.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
And when I woke up, so as I said too, that was complicated by the fact that I had developed pneumonia in both lungs. But when I woke up, I was first catatonic and then delirious. I can remember the delirium that lasted a whole day, consisted of a sort of dreamlike hallucination that I had been kidnapped by.
You were delirious for 9 days? 9 days? Yeah. 9 days. You remember the last day.
Yeah, I remember that I was kidnapped by people, oddly enough, who lived in Florida. And they were like very rural, backwoods people. And
Florida tree people.
Florida tree people, yeah. And that they were going to, the leader of this little gang who kidnapped me were going to kill me because the leader was going to kill me because he wanted to impress his girlfriend. And it was a very, very vivid dream that I had while I was awake. I knew I was in the hospital at the same time. That was just one of the... And I also remember that when I first woke up, I was irate because my hands had been secured to the side of the bed because apparently I was tearing out the IV tubes that I was connected to because I didn't want to be in the hospital. I had no idea why I was in the hospital or where the hospital was or where anybody I knew was.
We had, to back up a bit again, we had agreed when you were in the hospital in Toronto, like our whole family had sat down and agreed that the best option was this rapid detox in Moscow. And you'd been part of that discussion. But when you woke up after the detox in Russia, you couldn't remember any of that.
Right. I remember being really angry with you when you first showed up because there were very limited visiting hours, but I didn't know that.
It was this, oh man, it was so awful. It was, we ended up in like the outskirts of Moscow in a clinic for severely ill people.
Yeah.
And it was like Soviet-esque guarded. So the visiting hours were 2 hours from 4 to 6.
And you guys were driving how far a day to come and visit?
It was like 2 hours each way.
Right. And in
Moscow
the deep
winter.
of winter, in rough traffic, in bad weather.
Yeah.
To visit an ICU that was full of people who were in very rough shape, including me.
Oh yeah, you fit right in when you first got there. And at first it was like how, oh my God, we brought Dad to Moscow and destroyed him.
Well, that's what the doctor told you, wasn't it? The first one of the first ones said that.
Oh yeah. I couldn't even, like, there was one day that was so bad I couldn't go in. And Andre went in and they said, why are you here of all places, in Russian? And Andre said there was no one to help him in the West, which there wasn't. We looked everywhere. Right. And we tried 2 clinics and talked to multiple psychiatrists and none of them could help. And she said, great, you've brought him here to die. So, and that was, the scary thing about the hospital you were in Toronto is you had pneumonia that wasn't picked up until we got to Moscow. So when you arrived in Moscow, you had a fever and pneumonia in both lungs. And so when they sedated you,
and they intubated me as well.
They had to intubate you during the sedation because of the pneumonia. So we weren't getting care anywhere, and getting off of benzodiazepines almost killed you. And the place in Russia managed to stabilize you, but it was...
Yeah, to some degree. Like I didn't have the akathisia was much reduced.
Yeah, when the benzos were finally... So they did some plasmapheresis as well to get rid of the benzodiazepines in your blood, because the half-life of benzos are so long that even when you stop taking them,
of that particular kind, particularly.
Yeah, it takes a really long time for it to get out of your blood. So one of the things they did when you were under was plasmapheresis to get rid of all the benzodiazepines. So when you woke up, the only good thing that had happened was you weren't taking benzodiazepines and you weren't akathesic. You were totally screwed, but you weren't akathesic.
Right, yes, and that was a great relief. And then we went to a rehab center for a while in Moscow that was less medical and more physiotherapy oriented. And for a while I couldn't type because I couldn't remember how to put my hands on the keyboard. I couldn't walk up and down stairs because I couldn't see the stairs properly. I couldn't do up buttons. And one night I got up to use the washroom and then came back into my bedroom, and I couldn't remember how to lay down. I tried for about 40 minutes. I couldn't remember the sequence of actions that would enable me to lay down. So this was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. I ended up calling for a nurse so that the nurse, who was a very helpful person, could come in and tell me how to lay down. So that was very strange, kind of cortical blindness. So I stayed in there for 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. And then we went to Florida, where we thought it would be sunny and easier to recover, which it might have been. But when I was in Florida, my anxiety levels were, I wasn't akathesic most of the time, but my anxiety levels were unbearably high. And that finally got so bad that I had family members there who were taking care of me. You were there, of course, and Andre, but also my parents, my sister, some friends. Tammy came for a while. My son came for a while. But it got to the point where it was obvious that just the care of family members, no matter how well-intentioned, A, wouldn't be sufficient, and B, was just too much to ask of people. The responsibility was too great. And so that's when you and Andre had been communicating with this Serbian medical clinic for about 6 weeks, something like that. And they had been quite helpful.
5 months.
Okay. Well, this is partly why we're doing this together, is because I don't know all the facts at hand.
Yeah.
But they were helpful.
They were helpful. We, Andre managed to get in touch with this clinic in Belgrade where it's not, at least people who are treating you, it's not run by a psychiatrist. It's run by an anesthesiologist, which seems to be how you need to be treated.
Well, it seems to be working for me at the present anyways, and that's the best we've got. And it's pretty good because I felt better. Probably I felt better. See, there are things about the benzodiazepines too that I didn't really understand until I began to decrease their use. I had become quite isolated from my family members.
Yeah.
It was most noticeable, I would say, in my relationship with my son. But it was like there was a barrier up between me and people.
It was noticeable. It was noticeable.
I attributed that to the strange twists and turns my life had taken in the previous 2 or 3 years, because there was no shortage of strangeness on that front. And then also I had a strange muscle weakness that plagued me. And I now realize in retrospect that was all a consequence of benzodiazepine use. So using it, well, this is part of the reason we're doing this podcast or video as well, to let people know these are very widely prescribed drugs, and they are not safe to take for more than 2 weeks or a month at the absolute maximum. And if you take them longer than that and you end up addicted, or dependent, which means that you'll suffer withdrawal symptoms on their cessation, you are going to be one sorry person. Some people, have a better time of it when they stop their use than others. But enough people have a terrible time so that it's a medically induced epidemic. It's a complete bloody catastrophe.
Yeah.
It's probably worse than the opiate epidemic, and that's really saying something. So, and I don't know if I'm out of it or not. I mean, I have a hard time believing how much better I feel than I did 2 weeks ago. It doesn't seem plausible. So, it's possible that things will just deteriorate for me again, although I don't feel like that at the moment. I feel like things are put back together in an important way. Fortunately, one thing I've been able to continue doing through all of this is I'm writing a new book, and it's due in the middle of July, and that's going quite well. And I was able to do that even when I was in these different clinics, hospitalized in all these different clinics. Although I don't think I did any writing in Russia.
No.
Not until the very end.
Yeah. At the very end, you did before we went to Florida.
Yeah.
You were editing.
Yeah. Well, I remembered one other thing we were going to discuss. Some people, okay, first of all, I've had a tremendous amount of support from family members and friends. Like, really, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. People have gone far beyond the call of duty to help me and Tammy and I in the last year and a half. And there's been an unbelievably massive outpouring of public support, which has really taken me by surprise in some sense, because, it's one thing to express your condolences if you're discussing someone who, like my wife, is suffering from something clearly that's clearly not of her making, cancer, for example. But a dependence is more ethically questionable, right? Because you think, well, everyone thinks, well, what did the person obviously made some errors in choice that contributed to this. And that's a reasonable objection. And despite the fact that there are many people who found that their opinions didn't align with mine, let's say, the proportion of negative comments I got about what I was going through was very small. So that was really something. But nonetheless, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was the fact that, what's the old saying, physician heal thyself, right? I wrote a self-help book. I'm a psychologist. It's like, well, why the hell didn't I see this coming? And why wasn't I more cautious? And I think those are reasonable questions.
Why should people take advice?
And then that's the next question is, why should people take anything I say seriously because of that? And I guess what I would say is, if you're going to wait to learn from people who don't make mistakes, or don't have tragedy enter their life, you're going to spend a long time waiting to learn something. And the second thing I would say is, in my lectures and my writings, I've never suggested that I was anything other than one of the people who also needed to learn these lessons. So I included myself in the population of people who needed some moral improvement. And then the last thing would be, you have to make the decision about whether or not to attend to anything that I'm doing based on your own judgment about what I've done and said. And if you find that that's not convincing, then that's your prerogative. And if you find that it's useful, then, well, I'm delighted by that, obviously. And that's that. That's as much as there is to say.
Well, I think one of the points of doing this podcast was to inform people so that other people don't have to go through the same thing you went through, because watching it from the outside was the worst thing I've ever seen. Definitely. And hopefully educating people on the dangers of this will...
Well, that's saying something, because weren't you awake when they replaced your ankle last year in January?
Oh, yeah, but that was like, there was still an element of... Yes, I was awake when they replaced my ankle because I was trying to avoid the general anesthesia, because I didn't want the general anesthesia hangover. I should have just done the general anesthesia, which is something I realized when they were hammering my ankle. But yeah, watching you in how long you've been in pain has been significantly worse. And I did want to mention too, because people are going to be wondering, why you didn't get more help in North America. And one of the reasons was, well, we went to Russia. We successfully got Dad off of benzos, which 2 clinics in North America hadn't been able to do. We did manage to do that. And the damage that the benzos had caused and the detox caused was significant, but there wasn't any akathisia. So then we brought you back to Florida because we thought there's no point in leaving you in a center somewhere, right? You can come back, you can stay with family, and we can just wait. And maybe it's going to take two years. It looked like it was going to take a really long time if you were ever going to recover fully. We thought it'll be more comfortable in somewhere like Florida. And we waited.
And it probably was.
Yeah, well, Moscow winter was a little anxiety provoking, other than the medical experience you were going through. It was a little anxiety provoking. So there was Florida, and then the pandemic hit. So we weren't really able to go anywhere. And Andre and I spent months looking for a place that would take you and actually treat the neurological damage done by the benzodiazepines. Because this wasn't like, when I was 17 and had my ankle and hip done, I took OxyContin, a high dose of OxyContin for a year. And getting off of that, I experienced physical withdrawal, no psychological withdrawal. So lots of people aren't aware of the difference between psychological and physical
and that's
dependence.
basically the difference between abuse and dependence.
Yeah, and physical withdrawals means your body gets used to the drug that you're on, and when you take it away, it's as if your body's missing something.
Yes.
So
that's what I had with benzodiazepines.
Yeah. So it's actually difficult to find. It's nearly impossible to find physicians that know how to treat neurological damage done by benzodiazepines. It turns out we couldn't find anyone in North America, and we contacted places because being treated in North America would be easier than being treated in somewhere that the main language isn't English, right? And so it took us 5 months of negotiations to find the clinic in Belgrade where there was an anesthesiologist who could treat you. And thank God that he apparently knows what he's doing. And then we got here 2 days after Serbia opened.
Right.
So we weren't waiting around like twiddling our thumbs, trying to figure out what to do with you. We were actively looking for physicians that could help you, but there weren't any. And we were absolutely terrified that we'd bring you to a psychiatrist in North America or a center there, and they'd say, his anxiety is through the roof, put him on benzos.
Right.
And then that would have been terrible. So we did look everywhere, and it's been very complicated.
Yes, that's for sure.
And
it's been very complicated. And so, maybe we're confident enough that we've come out the other side of it, at least to some degree, that we were willing to risk making this interview, this video.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the reason we're doing it, apart from telling people that they should be exceptionally careful with benzodiazepine prescriptions, and like a very large number of elderly people are prescribed benzodiazepines, most of them women, but plenty of men too. And you do that at your peril. It also increases the risk of dementia quite substantially. So that's a lovely additional benefit. So watch it. It's a catastrophe that benzodiazepines are being prescribed the way they are so broadly. And so there's that. But then also we felt that because, I don't know how you'd say it, because people had been party to my certain elements of my private life and me to theirs, perhaps, that it was morally obligatory to bring people who are interested up to date on what's occurred. So far, so good. It's been nice to see you and Andre get a break for at least a couple of weeks. And it's been really nice not to be terrified out of my mind for I mean, in Florida, the best I ever got was not petrified with anxiety, but close to it. And I had that for a few days in a row, a couple of times. But here, my hand has a tremor, my left hand.
Yeah, one of the things with benzodiazepine dependence is it increases your seizure risk after you stop taking them. So this is how serious, to give an example about how serious this physical dependency can be, is for some people, even on a low dose of benzodiazepines, if they become dependent on it and stop, they can have seizures. That's how intense the brain changes can be.
Right.
So
on each seizure increases the risk of the next one.
You've been at a seizure risk for 6 months. You're still, if you're not on anticonvulsants, so then you have tremors everywhere and you're at a seizure risk.
Right.
That's ridiculous for 6 months after taking a drug.
Stopping. Well, that's right.
Yeah,
because
stopping completely.
Well, it was interesting too, because I was so appalled by what the benzodiazepines had done that, well, I went from 4 milligrams a day to 0 last May, and that wasn't tolerable. So I went back up, but not to full.
Part of the reason you did that is people would be like, why would you do that? You're supposed to taper. First of all, if you don't know about benzodiazepines, it's not obvious that you have to taper. But you also went to a psychiatrist to deal with your worsening anxiety that you thought was mainly attributed to mom's cancer. And his suggestion was try ketamine and stop the benzodiazepines.
Right.
So that was the first psychiatrist we tried.
Yes.
Right. And we saw at least 5 of them in different areas before we got to Russia. So it's not like we didn't give North America a good try. It's just, you ended up, you got worse and worse and worse.
Well, what the psychiatrists there generally insisted on doing was, quote, treating the underlying problem, end quote, when the underlying problem was benzodiazepine withdrawal, not some other issue.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with benzodiazepine withdrawal, so they tried to treat something they didn't know what to do with that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Or at least, in all probability, didn't exist.
Yes. You got treated by, you went to 2 different clinics and then multiple other psychiatrists, and they tried to treat your underlying problem.
Yes.
Which we had to have huge arguments about. No, this isn't there's no underlying problem. This is a benzodiazepine dependency and we need to get him off of it, but he can't tolerate it because of the akathisia. So how do you make him more comfortable while he's weaning down? And they had no idea what to do.
That's right. And that's something they've been very good at this clinic.
Yeah.
And advising you and me, for that matter, for the last few months while I've been trying to get my head screwed on straight again.
Yeah, they tried helping us from afar, but we needed more help than that. So I guess one of the things we've learned from this is there may be ways to treat benzodiazepine withdrawal that we're not aware of in North America that I'm aware of.
Yes.
So there may be ways.
We'll talk about this again at some point in the relatively near future, when we're more certain that what is happening to me now is working.
Yes.
It's only been 2 weeks and it looks great. I'm in way better shape.
Sense of humor is back.
Long.
You can listen to music again.
Right. Yeah.
You're writing every day.
Yeah. And I can write, I can create, not just edit.
Yeah.
It's a real relief to get my love for music back. And that's like a switch that's been turned on because it was gone completely. And now it's back completely. Very, very strange. So.
Yeah. So we will talk more about what's helped if we know that it's helped.
Yes. Then we could suggest to people what might be tried in the absence of any other options.
What they can talk to their doctor about.
But I'd like to reiterate, I don't remember I think it's 1 prescription either in 7 or 1 prescription in 9 in the United States is either for opiates or benzodiazepines. So that's obviously a huge proportion of the prescriptions. And it's very probable that someone in your family is currently taking benzodiazepines or will be prescribed them in the future for long enough to develop a dependence. It's like people need to know this. It's not good. Those drugs are for short-term treatment of stress-induced anxiety.
Or for surgery. They are used in surgery and things.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a long-term treatment, they're a complete catastrophe.
Yeah. And not everybody, like, you know, there'll be the person or two that'll say, well, I took them and I got off of them.
Yeah.
And that's true. But it seems if you look at the statistics, if you're older, then it's harder. You're more likely to form a dependency, right? And maybe that's because your brain isn't as plastic. Maybe it takes just longer to heal from them.
Well, it's also true of opiates. Like, not everybody who takes opiates for a long period of time develops a pronounced dependence. There's lots of individual variability, but the risk is still extremely high.
Mm-hmm. I had people message me after the video in September saying they'd gotten off of multiple drugs, and that benzodiazepines had been the most difficult by far.
Mm-hmm.
People with experience with opiates as well, or heroin or something, said benzodiazepine was a completely different.
Well, I'd had bouts of depression before last fall, let's say, in my life, and I would have to say those were among the worst experiences of my life. But I'd have to say that after searching long and hard for something that was worse than depression, I finally discovered it in akathisia. Because depression was, remember, we talked about that, right? And because you had suffered bouts of depression as well as the arthritis. And one definition we'd agreed on was that being depressed was like hearing that your dog had just died.
Yeah.
And remembering that continually. And then your dog died and you thought that, and that was a dog you actually liked a lot. You thought, well, that's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as depression.
Not even close.
Right.
Not even close. I thought it was going to be as bad, but then my dog died and I was like, nah, depression is way worse. Sucks the joy out of absolutely everything. Can't even see colors vividly.
Mm-hmm.
Like the joy out of seeing colors, which you don't even think there's joy associated with that. But
right, because, well, with severe depression, you lose positive emotion and gain a lot of negative emotion. But with this akathisia, it was like all of the negative emotion associated with depression, plus a very high level of anxiety, plus no positive emotion at all, plus the inability to ever relax, even for a moment. And so it was...
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes.
So watch the hell out for benzodiazepines. They're probably not your friend, or if they are, they're not your friend for very long. So,
yeah. And one of the weird things, I was prescribed lorazepam for sleep. I didn't take it very often because I found it didn't work very well. Thank goodness. But the funny thing about them, especially at a low dose, is they don't, or they didn't for me anyway, induce any type of euphoria. So when you take an opiate, when I took the OxyContin, I didn't like it, but there was some sort of high that had to do with the pain medication. But with the lorazepam, there was just an absence of something. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably a sneakier drug to be on.
Right.
Because...
Well, I think that's partly why I didn't notice what it was doing to me too, is that there was no immediate effect in the day of taking it. I mean, I stopped having that terrible reaction that we attributed to food. And so that eliminated the insomnia and the anxiety, but there was no noticeable effect from the benzodiazepines. And so I just never paid any attention to them. It never occurred to me that they could be causing me serious long-term damage.
You'd also taken SSRIs for over a decade.
Yes,
so it's like
they were very
antidepressant,
helpful.
Anti-anxiety medication. It turns out those are not the same medications at all.
Well, and I even knew that to some degree because I knew that SSRIs, the antidepressants, were much more effective long-term treatments for panic disorder than benzodiazepines. You know, but it's quite shocking to me, actually, that I didn't know, despite my professional specialty, that I had no idea how catastrophic benzodiazepine use could be. Anyway,
well, psychologists aren't psychiatrists. Psychiatrists prescribe medications. Psychologists counsel, right?
Right, but it's still useful to keep up on the relevant literature.
Oh, now you know.
Yes, well, now I definitely, I don't think I'll forget that.
Yeah.
Yes. So, it's funny, maybe we'll stop with this. Once I started to decrease my use of benzodiazepines, I was never tempted to go back up, except right at the beginning when I went to zero and had to.
Well, you were going to have a seizure.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
I couldn't even communicate with you.
But I thought after I got out of the Russian hospital that even if someone put a gun to my head and said, take this, I wouldn't.
Well,
I really think that for me, that it's no overstatement to say that for me, the consequence of benzodiazepine withdrawal were worse than death. So,
yes, that's what it looked like from the outside.
Yes, well, it you don't want to say something like that lightly, but there were plenty of times when it would have been preferable, as far as I could tell, just not to be there than to experience what I was experiencing.
When you're in pain, people who are being at a certain level of pain is like that. Right?
Yes.
If you're walking around, anything over really like a 7 or an 8, you can't stand it.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like from the outside.
Well, the other thing that the benzodiazepine withdrawal did that was absolutely dreadful was produce a sense of time distortion. So this was really obvious when I first woke up in Russia. Like the first day that you and I could speak again, you were wheeling me around in the aisle of the corridor of the intensive care unit. I was going to be wheeled around until it was time to eat. And I must have asked you how many times in 10 minutes what time it was.
Probably every 45 seconds.
Yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah.
And that's because for me, it felt like, a substantial amount of time had passed, an hour or 2 hours, something like that, some terrible amount of time. And so not only was I in pain and experiencing extremely high levels of anxiety, the duration of time had extended so that it was really unbearable. It was like the days were just lasting forever. And that actually disappeared quite a bit as the akathisia disappeared. And it isn't the case now, thank God, but it was brutal. It's funny, even now, because it's somewhat stressful to have this conversation, I can feel if I lift up my eyebrows a bit, like you might when you're interested in something, I can feel the tremors in my forehead. And that's partly stress induced. So we should probably stop talking.
Yeah, okay. We can call it a day.
Yes. Well, it was good to be able to sit here and have this conversation.
We're going to go eat a steak.
That's the theory.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for talking with me.
Well, thanks for being here. It's been a hell of a year.
Thanks for your help, too.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to give up. And now we're in Belgrade and seem to have found an answer. Thank God. Thanks for listening. I've linked everything we talked about in the description. The rare type of cancer my mom had, sodium metabisulfite allergy symptoms that caused the original prescription for benzos, papers on paradoxical reactions to benzos, benzo statistics on dependency, information on akathisia, something everyone should be aware of, and other people's experiences with benzodiazepines. What my dad went and is going through isn't as uncommon as we're told. Benzodiazepine withdrawal can be a life or death situation. If it doesn't make the people who suffer through it so miserable they're suicidal, they could be at risk for seizures. Many people do not make it. My dad was forced to detox because the akathisia caused by the benzos was intolerable, and we had to abandon the prescribed tapering approach after many excruciating months. Detoxing from benzos is dangerous. It nearly killed him. But the state the benzodiazepines had put him in was more dangerous, and this isn't too uncommon. Most of the celebrity deaths we hear about are benzo-related. We're told about the opiates involved in these cases, but benzos aren't as commonly mentioned. Heath Ledger, Amy Winehouse, Michael Jackson, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Whitney Houston, Tom Petty, Anna Nicole Smith all had benzos related to their deaths. When you look at what happened to these individuals, you might think, well, that couldn't happen to me. But don't be so sure. We had all the resources we could have, and it took us over a year to remove the drug and stabilize my dad so that he could function again and not feel like he was in hell. He still has neurological damage from the benzos, and it's been 6 months since he stopped taking them. He's still at a risk for seizures. Fortunately, we've found world-class physicians who are treating him properly now. It was not easy to locate these people. Who would have guessed they'd be in Serbia? We are going to disclose what's helping my dad once we're more sure that the treatment is really working. Hopefully this podcast will help other people avoid the horror my family has had to experience and is still experiencing because of benzodiazepines. There are hidden dragons everywhere. I'm just thankful my dad is back. Talk to you next week.